Today we continue our NHL offseason plan series with the number 16th ranked team from the NHL's regular season, the New York Rangers. Will we see significant changes in an attempt to get this team into the playoffs and compete for a Stanley Cup? We'll discuss the possibilities coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, today we're looking at the New York Rangers offseason and what we should expect from them moving forward here. Obviously, we saw a lot of changes near the end of the regular season, and I have a feeling those changes could very well continue as the offseason gets into full swing. Now, first up, we're going to review the Rangers' regular season stats, take a look at their cap space, expiring contracts, and then look at what we call the 5 burning questions facing this organization heading into the full swing of the offseason. So let's dive in here and take a look at the regular season stats for the Rangers. Now, of course, they finished with a record of 27, 23, and 6 for 60 points. They were a plus 20 in the goal differential column. Pretty solid for a team that didn't make the playoffs. They were certainly really good in that regard all season long. Just a matter of getting the right bounces at the right time, and obviously struggled against a few teams here, but they certainly had some good progress, I feel, heading into the tail end of this rebuild as they're now starting to get to a point where they can compete for playoffs. And as I mentioned, I expect big things here moving forward this offseason. Their power play was decent this year, 20.7 for 14th best. The PK was really good at 82.3 for 10th best. And of course, we've seen significant change shortly before the end of the regular season where they fired GM Jeff Gorton and President of Hockey Operations John Davidson. And then once the regular season was over, they did fire head coach David Quinn. So we now have Chris Drury as the full-time GM of the Rangers, and we know that ownership was pretty anxious here to make significant changes and really kind of get this team heading in a new direction as they come out of the rebuild, and they are anxious for this team to compete for not only playoffs, but to be able to go deep in the playoffs as soon as possible. Now, heading into this offseason, the Rangers have $23.77 million available in cap space as well. So they do have some flexibility. Now, let's take a look at the contract situation for the Rangers heading into the offseason. What do they have for RFAs and UFAs? Now, on the RFA column, they have some interesting names here. They have forward Pavel Buchnevich. Now, Buchnevich has come a long way. I think he's played pretty well the last few years. It'd be interesting to see how things work out there. They have Philip Hedl. They have Julian Gauthier, another young up-and-coming winger who I think should get more opportunity. We got Brett Howden. We also have defenseman Libor Hayek and goalie Igor Shesterkin. Now, there's some interesting names there, so interesting to see how those be handled. Not much on the UFA side. They have Philip Di Giuseppe, defenseman Brendan Smith, and Jack Johnson. And to be completely honest, all three of those UFAs likely don't return, and I don't really see a major problem with that, really. They don't really need to be replaced. They have plenty of people in the organization already who can fill those types of roles. Now, let's take a look at the 5 burning questions facing the New York Rangers this offseason, because I think we're going to see some really important questions that need to be answered. Burning question number 1 is, who is going to be the coach behind the bench? We still don't know the answer to that, at least as I record this video. Now, there could be a day or two gap between the time that I record this and the time it makes it to YouTube, so if there's been any announcements, certainly accept my apologies, but as I record this, we don't know yet who it's going to be. We know there's been guys like Gerard Gallant and Rick Tocchet have had multiple interviews, and those two seem to be the leading contenders. I know a lot of people feel Gallant has the inside edge, especially after returning home from the World Championship Tournament with a gold medal around his neck from Team Canada, especially considering how they started and how that team finished. Obviously, a lot of great coaching was used to help that team excel there. So he clearly seems to be the front runner, but it's not over. I think the Rangers are obviously very much watching the situation in Carolina. And once we know more about Rod Brind'Amour, because we still don't have an announcement on an extension for him, if that comes and he's out, and I think maybe Gallant or Tocchet will be named the head coach, but if he becomes available and it's known that he's not signing in Carolina or whatever, I can see the Rangers trying to swoop in and talk to him. There's no doubt they'd be interested, so we'll see how that goes. But that's certainly a huge question that doesn't need to be answered too quickly, but sooner than later. Burning question number 2 is, will we see a buyout for defenseman Tony DeAngelo? Tony was sent home by the previous regime with Gorton and Davidson after some antics that they just did not want to tolerate anymore. I had a skirmish with teammate Alex Georgiev, And that was the end of the line for Tony, who's done several controversial things in comments via social media and issues with teammates in the past. So at this point, it looks as though a buyout is most likely. They've explored trading him, according to NHL insiders, with no bites. Obviously, they didn't want to retain too much salary on a trade, because if they do, they'll be stuck with a bigger cap hit than if they consider a buyout. Because of his age, when you're under the age of like 27, or you have less than 7 pro seasons under your belt and you wouldn't qualify for UFA status yet, then it's only a 1/3 buyout. Whereas if you're old enough, it's a 2/3 buyout. So a 1/3 buyout would create a situation where the Rangers could save significant cap space next season, over $4 million, and only have a cap hit the following year of just over $800,000, just shy of $900,000 actually. So that's pretty good, really, considering all things. So I think more than likely a buyout is executed, D'Angelo becomes a UFA, and they move on from this player for good. Burning question number 3, and it might be the biggest one of all, is are they going to go big game hunting and go for a Jack Eichel trade out of the Buffalo Sabres? We know that Eichel likely wants out. We've heard reports from Elliot Friedman that the Sabres seem to be done as well and want to move on. And we know the Rangers have sniffed around this player on numerous occasions in the past. They were one of a few teams contacting the Sabres last offseason to try to see what they could get for a trade, and things never got too far. But we know that they're interested, and they have the assets to make it happen. They have a lot of exciting young forwards, prospects, defensemen. They have a lot they could include. I mean, the Sabres need goaltending, so they could include a guy like Alex Georgiev. If they want to include a defenseman, they have an ample supply of young, solid defensemen that they could look to include here. I mean, you have K'Andre Miller. They have the newly signed Nils Lundqvist. You have Zach Jones. So like one of those guys, for example, could be involved in the deal. If they can get away without moving a guy like Kakko or Lafreniere, then it'd be even more of a fleecing, you could say, in my opinion, by the Rangers. But at the end of the day, the Sabres are going to be asking for one of those two players. I know they will do everything in their power not to include them. They could include some other players, of course, that are maybe on the roster, like a Filip Chytil, maybe a Pavel Buchnevich. Of course, you could throw in a first-round pick. They have plenty of options here for the trade to be completed. Even if Vitaly Kravtsov, I don't think would completely be off limits either. So there's lots of options that they could include, but it's going to take at least 4, maybe 5 assets. It was believed to be 5 assets before. That could drop down to 4, given the fact of Eichel is needing a controversial neck surgery. At least that's how it's being viewed by the Sabres. The Rangers or other teams might be more comfortable with this and might not look at it as being so risky, but obviously they might be acquiring damaged goods and need to be careful here. But I do think that even with that, there'll be lots of interest, and teams are not going to hesitate to pull the trigger here and follow him through his surgery and recovery. But it would not be surprising, based on an owner like James Dolan, who wants to move this team forward. They also need to make some other acquisitions to get this team being a little bit more tougher and harder to play against. We know that from comments from the ownership, as well as, after the Tom Wilson incident earlier this season, there's no doubt the Rangers are going to be trying to bulk up on a little bit of muscle for sure, as well as a potential Eichel trade. But I expect some significant deals. Even if they don't take place, they're definitely going to be in a situation where they're having conversations on some very big names around the NHL. Burning question number 4 is, do you sign Igor Shesterkin on a long-term deal? He's 25 years old, got a couple NHL seasons under his belt. He's got some pretty good results. If I'm the Rangers, I'm trying to get a contract done for him, not only because you need to, but because you want to get a long-term deal in place so that he doesn't end up being too much more expensive down the road. I think a 5 to 7 year deal for him is appropriate, given his age and his pedigree and what he's capable of. He's clearly going to be the starting goaltender for the foreseeable future, and I think there's no reason why you don't try to get him locked up. Now, maybe he insists on going short term, but if I'm the Rangers, I'm trying to lock up Igor on a long-term deal. And the last burning question is regarding your top 2 centers right now. You got Mika Zibanejad and Ryan Strome, both coming off solid years. They've had a couple of good years in a row, really. Like they've been good players for a while, especially during their tenure with the Rangers. But they're nearing the ends of their contract. If you bring in a guy like Eichel, one of those players, for example, might even have to be included in the trade. We didn't even mention them. Obviously, that would be a center going back to the Sabres. But they're going to be looking for some expensive contracts. And you can't have both of those players be in there if you bring in a guy like Eichel. So, to me, if they're not included in an Eichel trade, you might see one of them be moved separately. but at the same time, they have to decide what they're going to do at that position. Once they know where things are going with an Eichel deal, they're going to decide on those two guys because they need to get something done before they get to be too crazy expensive. So to me, that center position is super important. They have some key players there to look after. Rather than wait too long before them to get to UFA status is going to be also essential this offseason. So let me know your thoughts on what you expect from the Rangers this offseason. I think it's going to be a really significant year. We're going to see some pretty substantial changes, and we're going to see this team be aggressive and try to make a really big improvement on this franchise. So let me know your thoughts on what you expect down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. I'll keep you up to date with all the latest news on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.